to a good place where truth and integrity meet. Every week, I introduce you to thought provoking and compelling premier educators, politicians, whistleblowers, best-selling authors, journalists, activists, and celebrities. And they all have one thing in common: they're people of truth, and many are considered modern day heroes. And do I have a special guest for you today? His name is David Bossie. Mr. Bossie has served as president of Citizens United and Citizens United Foundation since 2001. Beginning in August 2016, Bossie took a 5-month leave of absence to serve as deputy campaign manager for Donald Trump for president. He was then named deputy executive director for the Trump presidential transition team. In 2015, Bossie was ranked number 2 in Politico's top 50 most influential people in American politics. And in 2016 was elected to serve as a Republican National Committeeman from Maryland. In 2010, he was the chief investigator in the House of Oversight Committee. Under Bossie's leadership, Citizens United won a landmark First Amendment decision at the United States Supreme Court in United versus Federal Election Commission. The case, which saw the government assert during oral arguments that it had constitutional authority to ban political books, struck down 2 decades of unconstitutional restrictions on free speech. As president of Citizens United Productions, Bossie has produced 25 documentaries since 2004. Dave has co-produced 6 feature-length films with Steve Bannon, most recently Torchbearer, starring Phil Robertson in 2016. Some of Bossie's other titles include Rocky Mountain Heist, hosted by Michelle Malkin, Occupy Unmasked, featuring the late conservative icon Andrew Breithaupt, Our Sacred Honor with Senator Rick Santorum, The Gift of Life with Governor Mike Huckabee, and the award-winning film on Pope John Paul, 9 Days That Changed the World, and Ronald Reagan, Rendezvous with Destiny, hosted by Callista and Newt Gingrich. Bossie is the former chief investigator for the United States House of Representatives Committee on Government Reform and Oversight. During Bill Clinton's 2 terms as president, he led investigations ranging from the Whitewater land deal to the transfer of dual-use technology to China and to foreign fundraising in 1996. Clinton re-election campaign. He has authored 4 books, including the best-selling Intelligence Failure: How Clinton's National Security Policies Set the Stage for 9/11. And he's born in Boston, and Bossie attended the University of Maryland. He proudly served for 20 years as a volunteer firefighter in Montgomery County, Maryland, where he resides with his wife. Citizens United was founded in 1988 and is the leading conservative advocacy group in the country with over 500,000 members and supporters. Through its films, op-eds, videos, and grassroots organizing, Citizens United seeks to reassert the traditional American values of limited government, freedom of enterprise, strong families, and national sovereignty and security. Boy, what a pleasure to have this opportunity to interview you today.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate that. That's a tremendous job you just did there. Makes me feel very old. That long introduction there.
And and that literally is the smallest fraction of all your accomplishments. I mean,
well,
it really
I
is.
appreciate it. It's a lot of fun to do what you love to do, and I've been blessed to be able to do that. And it's been a long road. Been involved in a lot of really amazing things, and nothing has topped though being the deputy campaign manager and helping President Trump get elected in 2016. It was really an honor and a privilege, and really something. I've known the president for 10 years, and to see him grow into the job and doing such an amazing job for the American people. And now we're in the height of the election season to get him reelected. So it's been an incredible journey for me.
Okay. And being Trump's former deputy campaign manager, would you like to weigh in on the current campaign?
Yeah, we've had such an amazing run for the first 3.5 years of President Trump's administration, and through no fault of anyone's, no Republican, no Democrat's fault, the coronavirus, COVID-19, came across the world. This pandemic, something that if you had talked about a pandemic, if you talked about making sure you had masks and gloves and enough water and food for your family, people called you a prepper, right? People called you like, ooh, these people are nuts. Through no fault of their own, through his own, President Trump's had to lead America through a pandemic. Once in 100 years, this type of thing has now happened, not since 1918. So he's done an amazing job, because if you look at the problems that he had to overcome, which was the shelves being pretty bare of the essentials that we needed from a personal protective equipment standpoint, or even hospital beds. Our federal government and our military built entire hospitals and used military equipment and ships to provide hospital beds. We were going to have a problem with ventilators. Of course, the president solved that problem. So he's had an incredible private public partnership that really had a do it all, do it now approach in something that we call Trump time, which is you better get it done fast or he's going to find somebody else to do it. So it has been an incredible thing to watch, all the while that he's trying to run for re-election. And it's really, the most important thing that he does every day is being president. But the most important thing for us, as the guys trying to get him reelected, is what are we doing when this pandemic ends, and how are we going to pivot to make sure that he gets reelected? And if you look at Joe Biden, on the other hand, where he's just hiding in his basement, not doing any campaigning, not out doing any events, or really even a lot of interviews, you see why the campaign has him doing that. Because just today, this morning, Joe Biden did an interview with an African-American podcast, a leader in the African-American community, and he said, if you have trouble figuring out whether you're for me or for Donald Trump, you're not black. His condescension and his arrogance that he is just going to win the African-American vote is today's enormous backlash on him from the African-American community across the country. And so he is a gaffe machine. And to be honest with you, it's one of the reasons that they don't want him out there speaking, because he's past his prime. His age has caught up with him. It's a serious thing. You have to be able to be prepared to be president and to lead through this pandemic. And if you think Joe Biden could be out there every day doing what Donald Trump is doing, I think you're sadly mistaken. But we want what's best for Joe Biden, and I think that's not that he run for president. They should be looking for somebody else.
But despite all that, there's like a new Fox News poll that still finds former Vice President Joe Biden leading President Trump by 8 points nationally.
Sure. So a couple of things about polling. At this time in 2016, every poll had Hillary Clinton beating Donald Trump handily by much more than 8 points. So, and of course he goes on to win. Today, it's a static campaign. Joe Biden hasn't had to do anything in 3 months, and Donald Trump has had to lead from the front and be the leader during a pandemic, during an economic shutdown of our entire country, where unemployment that Donald Trump brought all the way down to 3.7, lowest unemployment in recorded history for African Americans, for Hispanic Americans, for Asian Americans, and for women in the workplace. So he has done that job. And now to have unemployment now with 30 plus million Americans unemployed, the unemployment rate hovering around 15%. But that's of no fault of Donald Trump's. And the American people are going to have to next November look and say, who is able to bring jobs back? Is it going to be Donald Trump, or is it going to be Joe Biden?
Mm-hmm. And prior to the show, we were discussing some breaking news. Do you want to enumerate on that?
Well, what Joe Biden talked about this morning with the African American community not being black if they support Joe Biden is really going to be a problem for Joe Biden for the rest of this campaign, because that gaffe he's going to have to answer for every single day between now and November. And Donald Trump's record with the African American community, whether it is the lowest unemployment and making sure that every segment of our country, whether you're white, black, brown, it doesn't matter who you are, where you live, what your background is. Donald Trump created an economy that was going to be better for you, real wage growth. So if you look at the African American community, they want jobs just like every American, and they want to make sure their kids are educated, and that's an important issue that Donald Trump's tackled. And then there's criminal justice reform, something that Joe Biden led the 1994 Criminal Justice Act that put a lot of African Americans away in prison for years, and it's been a 25 year effort to get criminal justice reform, and that's what this president has done. So he has an incredible record that that we'll put up against anybody. And so Joe Biden's gaffes today only continue his problems. They don't make it anything better for him.
Thanks for sharing some more details on that. And Senator Lindsey Graham said on Thursday that the Senate Judiciary Committee will start hearings in June on the FBI's investigation into the Russian election interference in President Trump's campaign. Would you like to comment on that?
Well, we're really excited that Lindsey Graham is going to be holding hearings and sending out subpoenas for documents and testimony. We need to get to the bottom of what happened with the unmasking and with the Operation Hurricane that was done by Comey and Clapper and Brennan and Strzok and Page, all of these people that have become household names in these investigations over the last several years. But Lindsey Graham now, it seems, is going to try to get to the bottom of how this happened, how James Comey and those folks at the FBI who wanted to defeat Donald Trump, and if not defeat him, destroy him from within. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about the deep state, when you hear people talk about that, when you hear that these people were trying to conduct a coup, that's what this is about. And Lindsey Graham finally, after several years, has said that when they come back in a couple of weeks from recess, that the Senate is going to issue subpoenas to I think it's 46 people who worked in the Obama-Biden administration, whether they worked in the White House, in the National Security Agency, whether they worked at the FBI and the Department of Justice. This is going to be a wide-ranging investigation, and Lindsey Graham is just the guy to lead it and get to the bottom of it and get answers that are so demanded by the American people. We have to find out exactly what happened and did this. And this is what I believe. The evidence that I've seen says that Barack Obama ran this intelligence law enforcement operation right out of the Oval Office. And that's where this is going to end up, at the feet of Barack Obama and Joe Biden.
Mm-hmm. And that is what Trump refers to this as the Obama Gate.
Yeah, Obamagate. I think that's what we're going to start calling it, because they love to come up with fancy names for everything. So we may as well have one. This is going to be an eye-opening experience for the American people, because I think, we all think that government, is big, and it's and you can, you watch these there's a lot of movies made about, spying and the government watching you and everything.
I'm addicted to now. I watch all of them. I love them.
So this is going to be a situation where the American people are going to find out that our government was in fact spying on different Americans, of specifically that were people involved in the Trump campaign and the Trump transition team. That's not what we do here in America. We don't use law enforcement. We don't use our intelligence agencies to spy on our political opposition parties or candidates. It's just not done. And this looks like that's what they were doing.
Well, it seems like the NSA has, I've interviewed a couple of whistleblowers, and there's just a complete overreach of surveillance. I mean, basically everybody is surveilled. Yes. And they're trying to stop that to some extent, but there's been some, they were recently voting towards some points in the Patriot Act, which did not pass. So what is your opinion on that? This huge government overreach to people's
Well,
privacy, breaching our privacy.
Yeah, an incredibly important issue in the Fourth Amendment. Violation here related to the unmasking, related to the surveillance, is going to be found out. But one of the things this is going to do, when the American people are educated through this investigation, I think we as Americans will all be better off, because we will then once again make sure that that there are proper safeguards at the FBI and other intelligence agencies in order to not be able to spy on Americans, on the American people. And the misuse and abuse of the FISA court, right? The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. There's a specific court in Washington, D.C. with specific judges who oversee this. In every single time the Obama administration used the FISA court to investigate the campaign and the Steele dossier and all of this this garbage that ended up being in the dossier, and whether it was Papadopoulos or anyone else, Carter Page, that was being surveilled, every one of those applications to the court was a lie. So they had created documents. They lied to judges in order to get the judge to agree to it, because the judge trusts the FBI and they trust those in government before the bench making an argument and showing cause for why they need this FISA warrant. And they believed them, and they lied and they lied and they lied. So through the end of it all, when we get to the end of this, in another 6 months, I hope that we will be able to have Congress look at reforming the FISA system, reforming the ability for the FBI and other intelligence agencies from being able to just spy on Americans without cause.
And they spy on their spies as well. I mean, it's just
sure.
I mean, it's just unbelievable what's going on. So thank you for commenting on that. This FISA abuse is just really it's really peaked. I don't know any time in history, maybe it's just because of the lack of technology that was not available during the time, but I don't know what to do about it.
But you're exactly right. Look, the only reason that we haven't had abuse of this system longer is because you're exactly right. The technology didn't exist. It's not because we had better people. The people in those jobs historically want to spy on everyone. They don't trust anybody. And look, we want a very, very aggressive spying agency. We want aggressive spying on our enemies. We do. I know I do, but I can tell you we shouldn't be spying on Americans. We shouldn't be spying on our political opponents. That's where you just cross the line, and that's what damages our ability to spy on our real enemies. That's a fact.
What are the loopholes in the Constitution in regards to that? Because we all live by the Bill of Rights, and from what I understand, they can almost, because of something, if it's considered wartime, which is kind of a very general wording, that can be that's kind of a loophole to thwart the Constitution, in my opinion.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, this gets into very complicated areas of what these members of Congress who debate this. Look, you see Senator Rand Paul make these arguments every single day. He's leading on these issues all the time, and they spend weeks and months trying to figure out the best way forward on the Patriot Act, reauthorization of the Patriot Act, and you have the U.S. Senate spend an enormous amount of time on this. These are incredibly complicated issues, and they're really not anything to take lightly. But it's what I want to see is this investigation get to the bottom of what happened, and then use the facts of what we uncovered to make sure it doesn't happen again in America.
Great. And then you've written some amazing books. Why don't we plug some books and maybe talk about whatever book you'd like to discuss?
Sure. Well, I appreciate that. So I've had been blessed that I have two New York Times bestsellers in the last couple of years. One called Trump's Enemies. Trump's Enemies: How the Deep State is Undermining the Presidency. And I co-wrote that one. And my other one recently called Let Trump Be Trump, the inside story of his rise to the presidency, which is our campaign. It came out in 2017 after we were successful in getting the president elected. So both of those books are very interesting and near and dear to my heart because, we get to talk about a lot of different issues, but in the issues we're just talking about now, we really cover extensively in Trump's Enemies. Trump's Enemies is a book that is dedicated to educate the American people on what James Comey was doing. And the thing about it is, I know all of these people. I was a colleague of Jim Comey's. I've worked with him personally in the past, back in the 1990s. And so I've known for the most part, all of these guys. Mike Flynn, General Flynn's a very dear friend of mine. I worked very closely with him. Rudy Giuliani, somebody else who's been involved in these investigations on behalf of the president, is an incredibly good friend of mine. So having worked with and known all of the actors related to these current cases, it's a pretty surreal experience. But Trump's Enemies, we interviewed. It was the first time that the president of the United States, during his presidency, sat down for an interview for a book. And so Corey Lewandowski and I wrote that book, and Corey was the campaign manager for President Trump's in 2016. And Corey and I sat down in the Oval Office with the president and interviewed him for a little over an hour. And one of the most important and most telling things that came out of that interview, when we were talking about all of these investigations, was that the President Trump believed and said, in our book, in the interview, that he believed when this investigation was through, that this would land right in the lap of Barack Obama, that he believed that Barack Obama personally instigated and followed and ran this investigation with Strzok, with McCabe, and with Comey at the FBI, and others at the Department of Justice. And we did this interview 2 years ago. 2 years ago, President Trump said this is going to be on Obama. And what are we finding out in the last couple of weeks? This is all on Obama. So it is a pretty interesting thing to think about. And I think about that interview we did with President Trump. And then you see what has transpired in these emails with the January 5th, 2017 meeting in the Oval Office between Barack Obama and Joe Biden and Comey and Sally Yates, the acting Attorney General. You have many of the bad actors were involved in that January 5th meeting in the Oval Office, talking about Mike Flynn and Russia, and they're running. That's the telltale signs. And then you have Susan Rice on January 20th, at about 12:45 in the afternoon, after the President of the United States, Donald Trump, has been inaugurated. Susan Rice is writing an email to File saying that Barack Obama, in that January 5th meeting, made sure that everybody was doing everything by the book. She wrote in a 2-paragraph email, she wrote, "Do everything, Obama wants everything done by the book," 3 times. 3 times. Why do you need to write it 3 times if you should have been doing it by the book to begin with. But why are you having to write it 3 times in what's considered a cover? It's a CYA memo. She's covering her own derriere there with that memo.
We just have like a minute. Sorry to interrupt. We just have like a minute left.
No.
So I wanted you to end on points that were interesting to you or that you feel you need to convey.
Well, look, I think that, what happened in that January 20th memo is very telling, because Susan Rice is covering for everybody. And that's what's happened here. That we've seen that James Comey, that Clapper, that Brennan, that Rice, all of them, along with Barack Obama and Joe Biden, ran an investigation that was counter to what we are about here in America. There's violations of the law across the board. The unmasking of Mike Flynn, the unmasking of the Trump children. This is devastating to the rule of law, and it's devastating to who we are as Americans, and that we need to make sure people are held accountable. And that is what John Durham, the United States Attorney's investigation, is conducting. He's going to get to the bottom of it. Lindsey Graham's running a parallel investigation in the Senate. Jim Jordan's running an investigation in the House. And hopefully we get to the bottom of it.
Well, thank you, Mr. Boss. It's been such a pleasure. You're a charming man, and we'll hopefully speak soon. Thanks for coming on.